Hello and welcome to SCAN's eCampus. Another live session that we are going to be having today is the resource box session on the Sbr exam tips. Today we have with us Ms. Alina Kareem, who has been teaching reporting paper for more than a decade now, and since the inception of SCAN's eCampus, she has been here with us today. I am Bilal Siddiqui, your host. Let me just introduce how this session is going to work. If you have just joined the session, there is going to be a comment section where you can be questioning whatever things that you want to ask related to the Sbr exam. If you have any other comment, any other things, you can also post that in the comment section. I'll be taking the questions one by one if it is relevant to the thing that we are answering or relevant to the content that we are discussing about. It is going to be an interview-based session, so I'm going to be putting questions in front of Ms. Alina, and she will be answering them as we go on. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, you can post them in the comments. So Alina, how are you today? I'm sorry, I think there is a bit of a disruption. Yes, Paki, the live session has started. So yes, there is a bit of disruption at Alina's end. I hope it will be resolved soon, and then we can resume.
Is it better now?
Yes, miss. Yes, it's better now.
Okay, done.
Right.
So, hi and welcome to the session.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
thank you for having me over. Sorry?
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. So I was just asking, how are you? So you just replied.
I'm good, thank you.
I'm good too, thank you. So Alina, as you know that we have been in the recovering phase of the COVID-19. The previous year was a very tough year for each of us, and I'm sure that it was not easy for any one of us. All of our families were affected, and many things were disrupted, especially in the education sector. There were many different things and many difficulties that were posed both on the student side and on the tutor side. So if you can just give an overview of your own experience, your own personal experience as a tutor and as a person who is running the management of an education institute. So what are your thoughts on it?
I think for us, shifting to, in the COVID time period, basically everything just shifted to online. From our point of view, I think the biggest benefit was that we did not shift to online when everything went into lockdown. We had a lot of experience of teaching online already. So I think that experience became a big edge for us, and our students faced because so
I'm sorry, I think there is an internet issue at your side.
Hi, Bilal. I'm back. I hope
Yeah.
things are okay now. This is the new norm that we were talking about. We face challenges, but
Yes.
then we are resilient enough to come back. Okay.
Yes.
So, yes, so this was one
Right.
of the biggest examples of how we deal with change.
Right. So since you are also teaching in SCAN's eCampus, so I think that experience did not change. But did you see any influx of students coming in the online study platform during this period?
Yes, I think if you're talking about the overall, in the initial time period, for the students who were facing this for the first time, that what is the experience of online classes, they did have some initial hesitation. Some had infrastructural problems also. But I think as the time has passed, this has actually emerged like a very big new opportunity for the students also, because for someone who always had face-to-face classes first and had never even thought of experimenting online classes, once they had to forcefully take them, it turned out to be a big benefit, because they found out that what were they missing out, and what was something that they were hesitating to experience also. So once they have experienced the benefits of this, so I think the students are now a lot more comfortable. And for some students, we've been surprised enough who were totally against the idea of online classes before, never experimented with online classes. Now they are saying that we've found out that it's actually easier to go for online classes. So I think that has been a very big plus for us.
Right. So coming to the discussion of today, which is the strategic business reporting paper, and you are the expert tutor for it. So one of the first things that we want to understand, because we have an audience which is coming from the FR paper, so they want to understand how has the examiner expectations different, or how are the examination expectations different from coming from an FR paper to the SBR paper. So what are your thoughts on this? That what is the transition that the students need to make in their own mind? Yes. Yes.
I think when you're talking about someone who's moving from FR to SBR, there is a very major difference. Yes, SBR builds on the knowledge that is there in the FR exam, but the students need to realize that now they are moving from skills level to strategic professional level. And when a person is at strategic professional level, they're supposed to behave not like just the preparers of financial statements. They're supposed to be people who are going to comment on them, who are going to analyze them. And that's how SBR is different from FR. SBR is not just number crunching, it's mainly a theoretical paper now. So there is very less focus on calculations, there is more focus on the discussion aspect. But ultimately, the students need to step up. There is going to be the requirement of assumed knowledge. The examiner assumes that the students know the knowledge of FR, but ultimately in the SBR exam, it has to be all from analysis and evaluation point of view. Even the requirements say explain with calculation. So they don't just say make a statement. Like, for example, if you're talking about consolidation, a normal FR exam would say calculate goodwill. SBR exam would say explain with calculation the goodwill of particular scenario. So they may just be required to calculate one thing and explain everything around it. So SBR is going to be a step up, and this is how the preparation is also different. That while practicing for SBR, the students need to focus more on the theoretical aspect also, rather than just the number crunching.
Right. So as you discussed that there is a bit of a change, and there is a huge change when you have to explain things rather than just produce numbers as in the FR exam. And this is a common question in students, that when they actually read the examiner comments or the examiner standard solution, there's a huge difference, or there is a huge expectation gap into what they can produce and what the examiner is asking them to produce in the standard solution. So how would you agree, or how would you disagree, that the examiner looking for something similar to the standard solution, or is something else in the game? So what do you say?
I think a very valid question, and something which acts like a fear for a lot of students, because for a lot of students, when they're practicing past exam papers, the first point of reference is seeing the examiner answer. Now, if you see the examiner's answer, that is very detailed. Even practically speaking, it's not possible for a student to write all of that in the given time allocated. So this is the first thing I always tell in my class also, that you have to understand that the standard solution is like even exceeding the benchmark which is required by the examiner. It's not even a 100-mark answer. It's more than a 100-mark answer. So you're not supposed to write as much, even if you write 60 to 70% of that answer, as long as you're writing in simple answer that's easily understandable and it is relevant to the questions, you can pass the exam. In our live sessions also, when we talk about SCAN's eCampus, this is how we do the practice also, because I tend to do that with my students, that we take up the question, we don't see the answer, and then we solve it ourselves. The main thing is that you should be able to cover the points given by the examiner, but by no means is a student required to write the answer to the standard solution level to pass the exam. Absolutely not. So the practice needs to be, it can be much simpler as well. No worries about that.
Right. So as we are moving on, I would like to just repeat myself that you can post your questions in the comments, and we will be taking the questions as this discussion moves on. Okay, so you can put your questions in the comment section, right? So Alina, coming to the SBR paper itself, right now we have just discussed what is around the SBR paper. So now coming to the SBR core paper. So if you would like to tell us more about the SBR paper structure, how is it different coming from an applied skills level, and how things move on from this place onwards, because after this there are the optional papers. So how are you going to tell about the SBR paper structure?
In case of FR exam, when you talk about financial reporting, the 60% of the paper is objective test questions based. So it basically means that 2 marks questions are there, and you just have to choose from an option, or maximum in the fill in the blanks, you have to fill in some digits. And the 2 CRs also that are available in the FR exam, they are totally numerical focused. So the students have to make consolidated statement of financial position or final accounts. And when they're even dealing with interpretation issues, they have financial statements available, complete financial statements are available, and the students have to analyze based on them. When you move towards the SBR exam, there are 2 sections of the exam, no choice available. We have 4 questions. And out of these, the difference is once again that the focus is not at all on just calculation. In certain papers, if you see the past exam papers also, in the marks distribution, we can identify that maybe even 30 to 40% of the marks were allocated to calculations. Rest was all discussion. We see in different phases when we're dealing with consolidation, smaller calculation, more explanation. We're dealing with interpretation, lesser calculation, more explanation. We have ethics over here, we have current issues over here, which are not there in the FR exam. So it's a big step up from the FR exam in terms of technical knowledge that is required, as well as, very importantly, the way in which you are going to answer the question. See, Bilal, my point always when I'm teaching SBR in SCAN's eCampus is that you should not have a fear of what you already know. So the examiner has exactly told you what the structure is, what he expects from you, what should be written in an answer, what's the course content. So none of this should come as a surprise to a student who is sitting in the exam. When a student opens the SBR question paper, the only thing that comes as a surprise or something unseen is that what is the company and what is the scenario. So the students should be prepared for what has been already told by the examiner, that this is what you're going to get in your exam. So that's completely the structure, and it is a big step up from the FR exam, and something that you need to practice a lot to get at the appropriate level for the exam.
Right. Okay, so we do have a question which is relevant with this part of the discussion. Takia One is asking, is it possible that the relative questions could be anticipated? For example, particular standards possibility could be high to be tested. So this is, I think, in relation to the coming March attempt.
Upcoming March exam. Taki, it is less likely that you can predict, because when you see even the published exam paper, it's not that every exam attempt is disclosed. So you can see that the latest exam attempt paper that you have, it's a combination of September and December. The other way to identify what was tested in the actual exam for both the exam attempts was when you go through the examiner's report. So in such cases, it's very difficult to identify or do question spotting. I do not recommend it to the students. Only I think something in which you can sort of like predict that these are the areas which are very important for the upcoming exam attempt. That is when the examiner writes certain articles about it. So there are 4 articles available by the Sbr examiner which are focused on revision, and we saw that once they were released before the December exam attempt, some of the areas were tested in December also. Similarly, we saw an article on cryptocurrency. Later on, there was a question on it in the exam. We saw ethics in digital age. Later on, there was a question in exam related to this. We saw SDGs. Later on, there was a question on sustainability reporting in exam. So I think the only point of reference is that if you see the examiner articles, they are limited in numbers. So they need to be covered very properly, because out of these, there is a higher chance that something is going to be tested. Like, just a secret, but for the upcoming March exam attempt, one area that has been very highlighted by the examiner, but it has not been tested so far, is the impact of any natural disaster on the financial statements of a company. So any particular standard. So the examiner has properly told us the impact on every standard. So that these kinds of topics, they are very highly likely to be tested. But one more thing, Taki, that you have to keep in mind is that not everyone in the exam center is going to get the same exam. There are shifts also. So there is a morning shift, there is an afternoon shift. So you can never question. It's just that you can identify what items are more likely to be tested.
Right. So coming back to SBR exam, if we talk a little bit about the different sections of SBR, so we know that there is a section A and there is a section B. So coming to the section A, what can you tell us about the content and technique needed to pass the question 1? Because the question 1 is a major question in the SBR exam. So what will we tell you about?
Absolutely. Question number 1 is normally the question with highest number of marks, which is 30 marks. But what I always tell my students is that never see question number 1 as one big question of 30 marks. It is always broken down into smaller portions. You have to understand that your first question is basically a combination of smaller questions, which may range from maybe 2-3 marks. Normally speaking, there is maybe a 3-mark question or a 4-mark question, and it may range up to maybe like 7 marks or 8 marks or maximum 10 marks. So ultimately, even if they're talking about a 10-mark question, we very specifically in our practice talk about the rule of AND, where even one question can be broken down into 2 separate questions. So in question number 1, the students need to first of all identify what are the different parts that are going to be answered. If you're attempting a computer-based exam, you're going to get the exhibits also separately. In case of paper-based exam also, you have to realize that in a case of every consolidation question, number 1, it's not always just consolidation. It is always going to be a mix of consolidation as well as some general accounting treatments. So in this case, when you're talking about the content and technique, you have to be careful that the question provides the information in the same sequence in which the requirements have been asked. So you have to go through the scenario, read the requirement, and then after reading the requirement, take up the specific portion of the question that is being asked and then answer it accordingly. And while you are preparing for it, be mentally prepared that question number 1 is not just a consolidation question. It is definitely going to have 1 or 2 parts which are going to relate to general accounting treatments. We've seen very frequently in the past questions coming up from IFRS 5, held for sale. We have seen a lot of questions from financial instruments. So all of this you need to be mentally prepared for. And the technique that I normally recommend, that I practice with my students also in my live sessions in SBR Scanzi campus, is that you have to read the requirements. You just skim through the question first because it's a longer question, read the requirement first, and then come back, read the scenario again and answer the question. That is something which saves a lot of time and gets you a better grip on the answer also.
Right. So are there any specific techniques which relate to just the computer-based examination? Because there is a huge shift in the students and in the regions which are now only able to give the computer-based exams, and sooner it would be implemented in all over the world. So are there any specific tips which relate to the computer-based exam?
I think personally, when you're talking about a computer-based exam, the only thing that is different is, see, there's the content of exam is going to be exactly the same. So a student who's giving the paper-based exam and computer-based exam, they're going to get the exact same question. The only difference is that in the computer-based exam, the information is given in the form of exhibits. I personally think that makes life easier for a student, because then he knows exactly what the information is and what is the requirement related to it. Once again, if you think that question number 1 is a 30-mark question that you have to attempt, it can be overwhelming. So you have to think that this small chunk that I have is of just 5 marks. So I need to pick out 5 valid points to answer this. In case of computer-based exams, the knowledge is exactly the same. The exam technique is exactly the same. The only thing that matters a lot is that you need to practice in a computer-based environment. You should, once again, my point always while teaching is that whatever you know in advance should not be a point that creates fear for you during your exam. So when you know that you're going to give a computer-based exam, you should be that fluent after practicing a lot. We have our own practice platform in Scanzi campus also. ACCA has its own practice platform. So you should have used that practice platform so frequently that you're totally comfortable with the computer-based exam idea. And the only thing unseen should be actual exam questions. You should know the technique, you should know the mark distribution, you should know the pattern, you should know the ability to solve and how you're going to attempt it. So it's good that you, and very importantly, in case of computer-based exams, what I always recommended that you have a very big edge. You can plan within the answer space. So when you read a question and you're planning your answer, you don't need to make a tree diagram separately. You need to plan within the answer space, write down the points, and then later on expand on those points. That's actually going to save you more time, and your answers are going to be filled out more quickly. But ultimately, it all comes down to practice.
Right. So it was a question by Asim Rafiq is, I will be taking SBR for the first time. I see both paper-based exam and CBE on ACCA website. Little confused on that. So I think we covered that point, that in some regions, there is still an option that you can give the paper-based exam. But in some regions, there's only the option of CBE, and that is going to be a similar paper as if you have given the applied skills paper, which is also a computer-based exam. So now the whole of the professional line or the strategic line is also becoming computer-based. So if your region does allow you to give, or you have an option to give the paper-based exam or CBE, then you have the option. If you don't, then you only have to go for the CBE exam. And as Alina just said, that it is a definite thing that you need to practice on it, because there are a lot of differences. As Alina just mentioned, that there is a Word format and then there's an Excel format, so the calculations need to be performed on the Excel format. So Alina, would you like to add something on how it is different in actually making a paper or calculations on a paper or using Excel to actually make the calculation?
I think in case of a computer-based exam, ultimately it becomes easier, because in case of an Excel format, you can apply the formulas to get the answers. So you don't really need to calculate them on a calculator and then move from the screen, from one screen to the other, and write down the answer. Within the computer-based format, you have the advantage that you can put in formulas, get the answers calculated, you can copy-paste your work. In a paper-based exam, you can't copy-paste your any of the workings. You can move your workings as per your requirement. You can cut and paste within the answer space. There is no issue in that. So all of that done actually makes your life easier. But once again, it all comes down to practice, because when you are attempting a computer-based exam, I always recommend to my students that there's an exhibit and there is a requirement tab. So from the requirement tab, it's better that you copy-paste the strategic professional questions. They allow this. So you can copy-paste from the requirement area, you can paste it within your answer space, so that you also remain focused while writing your answer as to what exactly the requirement was. So these are the small techniques that you have to follow. And ultimately, ACCA has provided ASIM the computer-based exams past papers also, because they want you to experience the same kind of format that you're going to have in your final exam. So depending upon which type of exam you're going for, I would suggest that practice within the same platform. If you're giving a paper-based exam, then write your answers and practice accordingly. If you're giving a computer-based exam, then only go for the computer-based environment.
Right. So coming back to our discussion, we discussed about the content and the technique needed for question 1. So moving on to the question number 2. So what can you tell us about the content and technique needed to pass the question number 2 of the SBR exam, which is also part of section 8?
In case of question number 2, once again, I would like to start off with what are the most common mistakes. So the first thing that very commonly students do wrong is that they think question number 2 is an ethics question. So right now also, if I ask, whenever I start my session for the question number 2 practice in my SBR 𝐒𝐭𝐫𝐚𝐭𝐞𝐠𝐢𝐜 campus-like session, I always ask the student, what exactly is question number 2 about? And very frequently, the students always say that it is an ethics question. You have to remember, question number 2 is not just an ethics question. It is an accounting issue plus ethics question. So if you have a 15 to 20 mark question, or normally it's around 20 marks, out of those 20 marks, maybe 12 to 13 marks will be allocated to accounting issues, which would have nothing to do with ethical issue. Only the remaining 7 marks or 9 marks would be allocated to ethics. So first of all, when you're preparing your standards, including the knowledge of FR as well as the new standards in SBR, you have to be focused that you have to solve the accounting issues first. That's going to get you a lot of marks. You have to follow the proper exam technique for solving the accounting issue portion, starting off with identifying the relevant accounting standards, applying them to the scenario, then giving your suggested solution. If a conclusion is required, providing that. So you have to think about it. And then you move towards the ethical issue. Definitely speaking, see, in your question number 2, you need to know that accounting would be done wrong, which is why it's going to be an ethical issue. So while you start reading the question, one thing that I always tell my students is that pick out what is leading to the unethical behavior. There is going to be something which is causing the accountant to do any kind of misrepresentation. It may be that the accountant wants to get a bonus, or he has a fear of losing out on job, or there is a fear that the company will go into liquidation if a specific debt covenant is not being met. So this is something that you have to identify, because that, and this is normally written in the first paragraph of the question. So you have to identify that, because that gives you a perspective that the remaining question is going to lead towards that. So if the profit is being manipulated, the accounting treatment's misrepresentation is also going to be something which is going to either understate the expense or overstate the profit. If a debt covenant is in fear of being breached, then maybe the company would try to show a lesser debts by doing certain kind of accounting treatment. So this is something that you have to focus on. First of all, always solve the accounting issue. While solving the accounting issue, you do not even need to think about the ethical issue. Okay, once you're done with accounting, then only move towards the ethical issue. In case of ethical issue, as I was just mentioning, there's a very good article on ethics in digital environment, because everything has moved to digital now. So the ethical issues are also now more related to the digital environment. There is a wonderful article written by the examiner on this. Only a small portion of it, around 3 marks, was tested in the latest exam attempt. Rest of it has not been tested so far. So once again, an area of importance. So do go through that. And plus, when you're solving the ethical issue portion, again, something that you need to keep in mind is that there are 2 professional marks allocated to that as well. So when you're doing that discussion, you have to keep in mind that you have to solve the ethical issue portion, and you have to go for the professional marks also, but they are only related to the ethical issue. So keep in mind, solve just accounting issue first. Do not even think about ethics, and then move towards the ethical issue portion, for which the guidance is there.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So moving on to the question number 2, because question number 2 also has professional marks. So how can a student gain these professional marks? Because there is a huge discussion in the strategic papers that how to get professional marks, and it is different for each paper in some aspect. So how would you say a student can get the professional marks in question 2?
In case of SBR, Bilal, when we talk about the professional marks, they are very different from the professional marks of SBL exam. So first of all, the students do not need to think that for getting professional marks in SBR exam, they have to do something like what they're doing in SBL. In case of SBR exam, it all comes down to where we started our session from, that when you are in the SBR exam, the examiner is thinking you to be someone who is reporting to the strategic board. So in most of the requirements also, the examiner says, write an explanatory note to the director. So you are a person who is not a basic level accountant, rather you're at a position who is reporting directly to the directors. So in that case, a certain level of professionalism is expected from you. Now, you're not sitting in front of the examiner. So the examiner does not know how you are going to express your answer in real life. You have to express it in writing. So when you're dealing with ethical issue questions, it's the way you present your answer, it's the quality of discussion that's going to get you these marks. In such case, you have to always identify first what the ethical issue is, how the ethical dilemma is being created. Just like what I told you, first paragraph of the question, something is always there to tell you what is leading to the unethical behavior. Then, thirdly, you have to tell what are the solutions available to the accountant. You have to talk about the threats that are there, the fundamental principles which are being breached, and the overall action plan that is available to the accountant who is reporting to the director. So all of that needs to be written. I always suggest that while not just in question number 2, in every question of SBR that you're preparing, always plan your answer first, because that is the planning which is going to get you the professional marks. You have points in mind. It's all about that the points should not be jumbled up in order. You should go in a particular sequence, and if you've planned your answer in advance, then automatically, rather than just writing, if you plan your answer in advance, automatically your answer is going to be better structured, and that's going to get you more marks and save time also. So in case of ethics also, it's just the quality of discussion that's going to get you marks.
Right. Okay. So some people have been commenting. We will be covering this in the last section, where we'll be telling about the conclusive tips. Okay. So we are considering your question, but we have included this in our discussion, but it is in the later part of this discussion. All right. So moving on, this was the section A. So section A has question number 1, which is a major question, as you just said, and there is question number 2, which is an accounting issue plus ethics question. And then moving on to section B. So what can you tell us about the content of section B of the SBR exam?
In case of section B of the exam, the good thing is that we know exactly what's the marking scheme going to be. So question number 3 and question number 4, they are going to be of 25 marks each, but then we have absolutely no idea what topics are going to be tested in them. So there is one part that we know and the other part that we have absolutely no idea about. But in case of section B, we have a rough idea of what are the areas that are going to be tested. So number 1 thing is that a lot of accounting issues are going to be tested in both question number 3 and question number 4. And then in one of these questions, either question number 3 or question number 4, there is going to be a portion which is related to what we call investor analysis or general interpretation of financial statements. So interpretation and evaluation, that is a compulsory part of the SBR exam. In each and every exam attempt, the students are going to get them. It can either come up in question number 3 or it can come up in the question number 4 of the exam. So that's basically the overall structure. And whenever investor analysis is given, that also comes in combination with accounting issues. So that is one question, can be either question number 3 or question number 4. And then after that, we talk about the current issues also. Current issues are also going to come up in every SBR exam. Normally they come up in section B, but there is no fixed requirement by the examiner. It can come up in question number 1 or 2 also. But if it's not there, then definitely speaking in question number 3 and 4, there is a high likelihood that at least 4 to 5 marks of current issues are going to be tested. So that's the overall structure. One of the questions is accounting issue plus investor analysis, and the other one is simply accounting issues related.
Right. Okay. So if we talk about, as you said, that we don't know which topics or which accounting issues would be tested. So how can a student prepare to get the maximum marks from question number 3 and question number 4?
That basically comes by proper course coverage. See, in the SBR exam, and rather in any exam of ACCA, there's no choice available. So you have to cover the breadth of the syllabus to make sure that you're going to cover everything. Having said that, even if you've prepared everything, there is a chance that maybe there is going to be a 2 to 3 mark portion in the exam, or maximum 4 to 5 mark question in the exam that you have completely forgotten about. You don't know what the accounting treatment is. I always tell my students, never get overwhelmed by this, because ultimately what you have prepared so far, by seeing my recordings, by practicing with me, by covering the past exam papers, by covering the relevant exam kits, you have covered. For sure, I can guarantee you, you have covered more than 95 marks. Now, out of that, you need to be careful that you attempt properly what you have already covered. In this portion, of course, once again, a very important area is not just knowing the content, it is also about the exam technique. So once again, because these are accounting issues, the same technique is going to be followed over here also. You have to, first of all, identify while reading the question, what are the relevant standards? Once you have identified that, identify and point out all the relevant standards that are going to impact your answer. The examiner wants to see that. Then you need to write maybe a couple of lines about the relevant portion of the standard. Now, a very big objection made by the examiner in this regard is that the students tend to write each and everything they know about the standard as soon as they see one word. So they'll see intangible assets in the exam and they will go writing all they know about IS 38. That's wrong. If the question is just talking about initial measurement, the examiner does not expect you to write what subsequent measurement is going to look like. So you have to pick out the relevant portion of the standard, then very importantly, relate it to the scenario. Related to the scenario, use the figures that are given in the scenario. Now, I'll just quickly cover the technique portion. So related to the scenario, do the relevant calculations, and then in the end, if a conclusion or an evaluation or an opinion is required, give that. Now, in this case, I would just generally talk about some very, very important exam tips. Number one thing, your answer, as I said, should always make reference to your question. How can you do that the best? Make sure that rather than writing, the company should do this, use the name of the company. So for example, if you're talking about Angel Company or 𝐒𝐭𝐫𝐚 Company, any such company, write that down. 𝐒𝐭𝐫𝐚 Company should calculate particular accounting treatment like this. Then if you're talking about assets or liabilities, refer to the particular asset or liability that is being discussed. So if they are talking about property, they're talking about building, don't just say, the accounting treatment of the asset should be this. Say accounting treatment of the building should be done like this. Impairment test should be applied on the building. So make the reference to the scenario. Number two thing, always remember, if there is a figure given in your question, there should be no way that that figure is not coming in your answer. One more thing, each and every word of your exam question, it is going to be used somewhere in your answer. There is no irrelevant information provided in the SBR exam. So every information that has been provided, it should impact your answer definitely. So you need to be careful that you pick out information in a way that it is going to ultimately impact your answer. It should be there in your answer. If you have not discussed it, then you're missing out on 1 point. Definitely, for sure, minimum. So pick out that information. And then ultimately, I think the best way to score marks in not just question number 3 and question number 4, the whole SBR exam is that talk to the examiner as if a teacher is talking to the students. So when a teacher is talking to the students and explaining an accounting treatment, he or she tells everything that's there about it. So you need to talk to there's nothing which is understood. So you're not going to consider it understood that the examiner knows this already because it's written in the question. You have to pick up that information, you have to highlight it to the examiner that the impairment is being done annually, or the impairment is being done because there is an indicator and this is how its calculation is going to look like. So you have to explain in a way that a teacher explains to the student. So that's the approach which needs to be taken, and something that's going to get a lot of marks. So a lot of tips covered over here.
Right. Right. So I think even as you said that if you are a management consultant or a reporting consultant, you are reporting to the director. So you would be explaining everything because you cannot expect the director to know everything about what is happening, right? So you need to be right. So I think you just talked about the investor analysis and current issues, which are going to be tested either in question number 3 or in the question number 2. So if you can tell us more about what investor analysis or what current issues question might look like and how to answer it.
In case of investor analysis question, it comes up either in the question number 3 or question number 4 of the exam. This is another question to which at least 2, not just at least 2 professional marks are always allocated. And once again, for investor analysis, it's about the quality of discussion. How do you improve the quality of discussion? The examiner simply repeatedly says, be empathetic. Now, what do we mean by that? Empathy means that you put yourself in the shoes of that other person. So if the question is saying that you have to comment on it from an investor perspective, think of yourself as an investor. What would you be looking in the question? Investor is the most common stakeholder which is tested in Sbr exam. So you have to think like someone who either has already invested in the company or plans to invest in the future. Now, when you're thinking like this, now you have to see that what is the accounting treatment and how is that going to impact the profits. Now, you see in your Sbr exam, always, you're not going to get a full-fledged financial statement like FR exam. Over here, there's going to be either a situation, an accounting issue related to which you have to tell, or there is going to be an issue with the standard. Like in one of the past exam papers, the examiner said that in case of investment property IAS 40, if you're dealing with cost model and fair value model, how is that going to impact the answer? Now you have to see from the investor perspective, what is going to be the impact of each model on profitability, because the investor is going to focus on profitability. Then in one of the, when the lease standard was changing, there was a standard on comparison of old and new treatment. In that case also, you have to ultimately see what is going to be the impact on financial statements and how an investor is going to go about it. So in this case also, when you talk about the quality of discussion, it is always about first discussing the accounting issue, the principles related to that, and then moving on to the investor perspective that how it is going to be impacted. You can always mention that further information is required in this regard for a final decision, but always focus on that. And secondly, when you talk about current issues, see, the best thing about current issues is that the examiner, in case of exposure drafts, has already provided you with a list of topics out of which the current issues are going to be tested. So do go back, see the list of documents that are available for Sbr, identify what items are covered in current issues. Then number 2, the examiner has written 4 wonderful articles for you. There are 2-3 new technical articles, not new, but relatively new. They came up in 2020, most of them, which cover some upcoming accounting issues. So cover them because that's going to give you a very good perspective. In the long term, if you're studying for June exam, then I'll tell you in more detail once you come in the course also. But there are certain websites as well which tell you about all the new issues, and you just need to be up to date with the accounting environment. Once again, it all comes down to the fact that the examiner is thinking about you not just as a student, but as a person who is handling accounts at a strategic level. So you need to be up to date with all of these items, but do focus a lot on the technical articles as well as the exposure drafts that have been provided already by the examiner. They are related to management commentary, there is sustainability reporting in it, integrated reporting comes up, there are a couple of changes that are taking place in some of these standards. It's best that when you cover a standard, see the accounting issues related to it, so automatically the current issues are also prepared in that case.
Right, okay, thank you. So as you just mentioned that there are professional marks available in section B as well. which is, I think, rather different from the other exams. So if you can tell us more about the professional marks that are available in Section B and how can these be scored?
As we just said, in case of Section B also, what you need to focus on is the systematic approach to the answer. And in this case, I would just say once again, plan the answer properly. Because if you're doing an investor analysis, be very careful that professional marks are only available for one part of the answer. So they're not available for, if there is a 25-mark question, professional marks are not available for 23 marks answer. No, they're just associated with one part, which is normally around which normally has marking scheme of around 7 to 10 marks. So while writing that answer, you need to be all the more careful that your answer should be structured very well. So you identify the issue first, you identify the relative accounting treatment, then you focus on the investor perspective. And one more thing that gets you marks, not just the professional marks, but it gets you marks anywhere in the SBR exam, is that you have to talk about the relevant principles also. Whatever accounting treatment you discuss, talk about the relevant accounting principles and make a linkage to the conceptual framework also. How it is improving relevance, how it is improving faithful representation. If you're shifting from fair value model to from cost model to fair value model, comparability is going to decrease. The examiner loves such answers, and easily they can get you 1 mark.
Right. Okay. So I think you just discussed about the marking scheme or the thoughts of the examiner. So as you have seen in the past, and you have quite a lot of experience in discussing the paper and discussing even the mark scripts from the SBR examiner. So what can you tell us that how to actually, or how the examiner thinks about each mark? So if we just talk about the 0.5 or the half mark, so how can a student gain half a mark? And then we'll discuss about how a student can gain a full mark when discussing a current issue or doing any question in the SBR exam.
Now, interesting thing about SBR exam is that normally speaking, the examiner says that a student can get a full 1 mark. There's not going to be a concept of many 0.5 marks in your exam. So in that case, you have to always, when you're writing, you need to focus on getting 1 mark, and 1 mark a student can get by writing a well-developed point. When we use the word a well-developed point, that means it is something which is going to focus on not just the accounting treatment, but going to make a link to the relevant standard and the underlying principles also. So if a person is talking about the calculation of goodwill and he says that cost of investment is this much amount, not just writing the amount is enough. You have to explain to the examiner how that investment has been calculated. So it comprises of a share-for-share exchange, and it comprises of contingent consideration. What is the current accounting treatment? What is going to be the subsequent accounting treatment? What are the challenges with respect to calculating the fair value? Then if you're talking about the calculation of goodwill, why is goodwill recognized as an asset? Now, just saying that goodwill is going to be recognized in the business because one business paid more than the fair value of net assets of the other is not enough. A well-developed point is going to tell why goodwill is an asset. There is going to be an inflow of economic benefits because of which the company has paid more and therefore goodwill has been recognized. This is a well-developed point. So in each and every case, you have to not just tell the accounting treatment, you have to tell the principles behind that also. That can lead you to the actual calculation. Now, for the students, a very good guide that is also available is there are 2 articles written by the examiner named Read the Mind of Marker. They are very good articles. You get time to go through them and you will be able to identify how one answer can get 1 mark while the other one, writing how half of it just gets a 0.
Right. Okay. So I think that covers the whole SBR aspect of the paper, understanding the paper and understanding the marks and how to get the maximum amount of marks from the paper. So coming on to, so we have quite recently, we have wrapped up the whole SBR exam and the whole preparation process that is going to be there, because now we are moving towards the paper or the attempt, which is going to be in March, and there are only 2 weeks left for the students to prepare, or almost a week, or you can say 1.5 week left. So what is the best resource, or what are the best resources available online and in printed form for the students that you know and that you would like to recommend to the students to cover in the upcoming 15 days?
With respect to the resources that are available, there are two types of resources. Number one, the resources that have been made available by the examiner himself. So for that, the students need to go on the ACCA website, go to the Sbr Exam. There are past exam papers available. That should be the first point of practice. When a student goes into the exam, it should be after attempting all of those past exam papers. And by attempting, I mean solving them in writing. If you haven't done so far, you still have time, you can go ahead with that. Number two thing is the coverage of technical articles. There are very good technical articles available. We have seen in the past exam papers, at times the information straightforward, which is written in the technical article, is tested in the exam also. So that is something which the students need to cover. Number three, see the examiner reports, because the examiner reports highlight the weak areas of the students, and then there is a likelihood that the same things are going to come up in the future exam also, be it March exam or the June exam. Other than that, if you are looking for the tutoring support and the marking support, because one more thing that I strongly recommend always is that before giving your final exam, give a mock exam also. So in this case, you should always, before jumping into the actual exam, you should practice the jump as well. And if a student wants to just quickly cover the exam techniques, because we had limited time, so we had this, limited things to discuss. So if a student wants to go ahead with the exam techniques and a mock exam, then the SCANS eCampus is also offering products like Exam Success Program. The students can join that for a quick review of the exam techniques and how to get maximum marks. If you've covered the topics from textbooks, ultimately you need that final polishing to be done. Then that can be done through the SCANS eCampus products. For the upcoming June exam attempt, yes, our admissions are already open. Some of the students, they are showing interest in the June exam also. So yes, I would just quickly cover that. In that case also, guys, whatever I've told you over here, in the comprehensive study support of SBR, we're going to do all of that together. So we're going to practice the past exam papers together. We're going to see the marking scheme together. We're going to see what is going to get you 1 mark, what have you written that's not going to get you a mark. So all of that comprehensively, each and everything is covered in our CSS product. We call it CSS because comprehensive study support is there. So for the June students, comprehensive study support is the relevant program, and for the March, for just the final push, I think exam support is the best product.
Right. So I think there's a relevant question with regards to this too. I've gone through SBR syllabus but not feeling confident. Is there any revision kit that you guys are offering? So I think Alina just answered this question very well, that there is a revision kit, or not a revision kit, but actually a whole product which is based on the exam techniques. And there's also another product which is the revision game, which covers the revision aspect. So if there are some topics or you just want a quick refresher for everything that you have studied so far in the SBR, so there's also another product which is the revision game, and there's another product which Alina just talked to us about, which is the exam support, which only has the exam application techniques. So if you only are looking for that, then Exam Success or ES is the way to go. And if you still want to get a refresher of the whole course, then the revision game is the main thing. And if you're going for June, as Elena just said, that you have to go for the CSS product, which is a comprehensive study support, which covers all of the different aspects that you need to pass your final SBR exam. Okay, so
CSS is going to be like us holding your hand and making you walk. The final, the revision game and the exam success for March attempt, that's just the final, just close to the finishing line products that you need to cover for March exam attempt.
Right. So I think there is another question which is also about how to give the March exam. So kindly tell a crash plan for 10 days. So what is going to be the crash plan, Alina, as he's referring to the crash plan? I hope he doesn't crash.
No. I'm sure 𝐒𝐭𝐫𝐴𝐍𝐻 still handle the exam well. The crash plan basically is dependent on how much you've covered before the crash. So ultimately, if you have covered, my assumption is that by this time you must have covered the exam content at least once. So now at this point in time, something that you need to focus on is number one, attempting the past exam papers. We have now past exam papers available from September 2018 exam attempt. There are 2 specimen exam papers also available. So do cover all of them. And then I would recommend that you take our mock exam also, because we provide the marking facility also that can give you a very good insight as to where you stand right now. We provide feedback, so that's going to tell you that whether you need an improvement in the exam technique or whether there is a lacking in the content also. That is something that you can do through the mock exam. So do attempt a mock exam from us, or whichever you feel comfortable, the options. So do go for the exam, mock exam, and somewhere that is offering you marking also. And once you've done that, that's going to give you a very good idea. But generally speaking, for last 10 days, I would just focus on practice. And practice also, not just opening the past exam paper, reading the question, reading the answer, no. That's the easiest thing to do. You have to practice in writing. If you're giving a computer-based exam, then open the computer-based exam environment and solve the questions there. That's going to give you the final confidence to win the exam.
Right. So I think the question did cover this last section that we had. So any overall tips? So what are the final tips? So if you can give just 2 to 3 tips to the students who are actually going to attempt for the SBR March attempt. Yes.
I think we have pretty much covered a lot of tips, but ultimately, see, whenever you're preparing for the exam, don't just focus for 50 marks. You have to prepare for 100 marks. Just cover the content properly, and there are few exam areas, like there are certain portions of consolidation. There is definitely going to be an ethical issue. There's definitely going to be an investor analysis portion in your exam. So the areas that are there, do focus a lot on them. The second thing would be practice in writing. And once again, I cannot emphasize enough on this. Practice in writing and make relevance to the scenario. For every answer, make relevance to the scenario. Yes, if you get a question in which you have absolutely no idea what the correct accounting treatment is, only then write just the relevant portion of standard. Otherwise, it should be always writing the relevant portion concisely and then applying it to the scenario. That's going to get you marks. And ultimately, just practice a lot, go through all the past exam papers repeatedly, and do go through the technical articles which are available on the examiner website, because out of them, some are very important for your upcoming exam point of view. The revision articles also, which have been made available by the examiner, they're very good practice. So do go through them. Like in one of the revision articles, there was a question related to impairment. Some of the students got it in the December exam attempt. So like this, there is a probability of those topics coming up in your exam also. So please do focus on them, and give a mock exam also.
Right. So I think we have covered all of the aspects that we wanted to discuss. This is the last question I think that we'll be taking. Can you kindly provide some time management advice? So I think, Alina, can you?
Taki, in case of time management, first of all, you need to know how much time is available for you for every mark that is there in the exam. I always tell my students that if that time is up, just leave your answer there and move forward. If you have time in the end, you can always come back and complete the answer. Because if you spend extra time on one answer, the same time if you spend, for example, 5 minutes extra on question number 1, you're not going to get as many marks as those 5 minutes if they're spent on a new question. So always, once the time is up, I know it's difficult to leave the question there, but just assume that my paper is finished. I have to write whatever I have to within this time. Leave it there and then move forward. And number 2, plan in advance. That's the best advice I can give. Plan your answer in advance. The points, the relevant standards, what you're going to write, what are the relevant impacts. As I told you, each and every word of your question is going to impact your answer. So pick out, read it carefully, underline, highlight, whatever you want to do, and plan your answer accordingly. Once you have planned, then a lot of students think that planning is a wastage of time, and they feel that if we spend the same time in writing the answer, we can get more marks. That's not true. Plan in advance. Once your answer is properly planned, then start writing it. It's going to be a more professional answer also. It's going to cover everything, and it's going to be better structured as well. So that is something that saves a lot of time, the proper reading and planning of the answer.
Right. Thank you. So I think that is it for the session today. Thanks a lot, Alina, for giving us your precious time, and you gave very, very valuable advice, which was very useful. And I hope the audience, which is going to see the recording of this session, is also going to get a lot of benefit from this, not only for the March attempt, but also for the upcoming attempt of the SBR exam. We covered each point. We covered the paper structure. We covered how the examiner is thinking. We covered the marking guide. We covered the SBR resources. And we also touched on how SCAN's eCampus can actually support you in getting pass in your and getting actually a good score in the SBR exam, because we have the SBR tutor expert, Ms. Alina, right here with us, who is going to be teaching you in the CSS exam and in the other pay products that we have as well. So SCAN eCampus, if I just like to introduce it a bit, that we provide ACCA tuition to our students, and we have 3 papers, as Alina just mentioned. There is CSS, which is Comprehensive Study Support. Then there is the Revision Game, which is for those students who want to revise and who want to get a quick refresher of the course. And then there is Exam Success, which is the exam application techniques, or the students who have covered the entire syllabus but just want to get the gist of how to actually attempt the paper. That product is for that. So that's it for this session. Thank you, Alina, for joining us. Thank you to all the audience who just gave us their valuable time and who have been really engaging today. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Alina, again, for giving us your precious time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Best wishes to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So that would be it for the session. And we hope to see you in the next resource box session with another expert tutor with us. And that's it for me. And SCAN eCampus is signing out. Thank you.